Okay, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay, so I was several requests to start today with the Haggadah. And actually, this what we've been looking at in your
Rabbi
meeting.
Silber, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to maybe move a half an inch or 2 inches back? I can't see your face. Yeah, thank you. That's better. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll begin with the Haggadah, and perhaps we'll get back to our topic of kingship. We will be continuing after Pesach. The precise schedule will be given to everyone. And okay, so let us begin.
I think Micah might have had a quick question at the beginning of class.
Yes?
Oh, yeah, just a simple question about, we talked about King David being potentially, not in full possession of his faculties. But I just wanted to point out that it seemed to me that, number one, he had some very significant advice for Shlomo that seemed, pretty knowledgeable, or pretty much, like a guy who knows what he's talking about. And also, what particularly impressed me was the way in which he managed to get King David get Solomon to have to be able to to be on the donkey, and all the things he set up so that Shlomo would be recognized as king. Seemed to me a very savvy guy still. And I just wanted
I agree with you. He seems to have a comeback. The question is he jolted into reality, one might say, or is it that he all along knew what was going on? I guess my point was that it's not clear, but I completely agree with you that he has a revival at the end. He seems to know exactly what's happening. And when he does make that, choice, he makes a very definitive choice, and he gives all the instructions and all that. We agree 100% on that. I was just saying that initially it's very hard to know. Hard to know what the state was prior to the intervention, but the intervention seems to be very helpful. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Important point. Okay, so I thought it would be, given the fact that Pesach is soon upon us, this year under very unusual circumstances. So it would be not a bad idea, at least to begin. We'll see how far we get with some basics about the Seder. And just to go through some of the elements of the Seder. There are some people this year who perhaps will be having their own Seder, never did this before, and that would be helpful as well, hopefully. So let's begin with that. And if anybody has any questions or comments throughout, please, as Micah did, just speak up, unmute yourself, speak up so we can all hear, and we can more of a sense of learning together. Now, in terms of the Haggadah, if you have a Haggadah, it's a good thing to take a moment to get a Haggadah, or if you don't have a Haggadah, you can get it on, say, Sefaria Haggadah. You can see it on your screens. So it would be a useful thing to have a Haggadah, because we'll be looking at the Haggadah and just the basic elements of the Haggadah. So either on Sefaria Haggadah, or if you happen to have a Haggadah before Pesach, pick up a Haggadah, and that will be very helpful, I think. Okay, so we're sending a link for the Haggadah for those who want to get it on their computer. So let's begin with the Seder. Some of the basics of the Seder hopefully will be helpful. We begin the Seder with Kiddush. As we begin every festive meal, both the Shabbat and every holiday which has sanctity, Kedusha Tayom, So we begin with Kiddush. Kiddush, as it means, it's sanctification of the day. We attest to the fact that it's a holy day. And we begin our meal with Kiddush, and Kiddush starts the meal. Kiddush, halakhically, actually permits one to eat the meal. It's what allows one to eat the meal, is the fact that we proclaim the day to be a holy day. Say Shabbat, for example. It's a holy day. It's a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. It's a remembrance of creation. And that's the Shabbat Kiddush. The festival Kiddush, the Yom Tov Kiddush, which includes Pesach, that talks about, among other things, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, all of the holidays, and in particular Pesach, of course, are a remembrance of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Mitzrayim. And it's interesting that about 100 years ago, a little more than that, they discovered the Geniza trove of all kinds of manuscripts in the Geniza in Egypt. And they discovered many early works of the Gaonim, etc. And what they found there was that there were ancient traditions in which the Kiddush of Pesach was different from all the other Kiddushim. It had a different text. And not only did it have a different text, and it actually makes sense, since we speak of Kiddush as being a remembrance of Yetziat Mitzrayim, given the fact that on the night of Pesach we are recalling and re-experiencing the Exodus, it makes a lot of sense that the text for the Seder, Kiddush for the Seder, would be different, would be expanded, which it is in many of the ancient versions. And there also turns out to be a lot of discussion by the Gaonim about which of these additions to the Kiddush is valid, which should be said, and which should not be said. So the truth is that nowadays we say the same Kiddush for the Seder that we say all year for all the holidays. But there was that big discussion many years ago, over 1,000 years ago, about whether things should be changed for Pesach, which underscores the fact that the Kiddush at the Seder is very special. And it's special also in that it's the first of the 4 cups of wine. The Seder has Arba Kosot, 4 cups, the first of which is Kiddush. So it means that Kiddush at the Seder is actually part of the Seder. It's not something we do before the Seder. It's something that we do as part of the Seder, as part of the experience, as part of the mitzvah of Pesach night. So we start with Kiddush. That's why there is a tradition to start the Seder when it's already night. Normally, you can start the holiday early. You can start Shabbat early. You can add to the Shabbat, but it's a common practice not to do that at the Seder, which means you start the Seder pretty late because we already changed the clock. But in any event, there is that practice because it's part of the Seder, and the Seder is at night. Okay, so that's how we start. We start with Kiddush, and that's the first of the 4 cups. So let me just say at the outset, we call what we do at night the Seder, the order, and there's a particular order to the events. And one way of ordering the events is through the mechanism of the 4 cups. The 4 cups of wine are an ancient way to set up the Seder as an ordered event. Essentially, these are the 4 mitzvot of the night of Pesach, of the Seder. The first is Kiddush. That's the first cup. The second mitzvah of the night is to tell the story. We call that Magid. That's the second mitzvah. And after we complete Magid, we make a blessing. The blessing is Asher Ga'alanu. And that blessing is recited over a cup of wine, and we have the second cup of wine. The first mitzvah of Kiddush, saying that the day is a holy day, is a bracha. And then we make also a blessing over the wine, and we drink the wine. So those are the first 2 mitzvot, Kiddush and telling the story. The third cup of wine is at the end of the meal. One might say that the Birkat HaMazon, at the end of the meal, which is recited holding a cup of wine, is a series of blessings, birkat, blessings of the mazon. There are three, actually four blessings that we say in birkat hamazon. And then we have a fifth blessing, Borei Pri HaGefen, and it's recited over a cup of wine, which completes the meal. And the meal has other mitzvot. It has the matzah, it has the marar. Those are the mitzvot that we perform the afikomen as a remembrance of the Pesach. So those are other mitzvot that we perform at the Seder. And the meal itself may be a mitzvah, festive meal. And that's recited over the third cup of wine. And the fourth cup of wine at the end of the Seder is recited at the conclusion of the Hallel. The fourth cup is about Hallel. And actually at the Seder, we say two kinds of Hallel. We say what is called, what we call Hallel, the regular Hallel, called Hallel HaMitzri. And we also say what's called Hallel HaGadol, Psalm 136, I believe, so 135, 136, Hodu Hashem ki tov ki le'olam chasto. At the end of the Hallels, we make a blessing, which ends with Melch Mula Batish Bachot, and then we drink another cup of wine. So that's the fourth mitzvah. The fourth mitzvah is Hallel. So the cups of wine, in effect, are ordering the events of the night, which we call a Seder. The truth of the matter is that at the end of the Seder, we say two Hallels. We say one Hallel called Hallel HaMitzri, and we say a second Hallel, Hallel HaGadol. And there was a common practice to recite two blessings, to have 5 cups of wine. Already in the Gemara, it talks about whether you have 4 cups or 5 cups. The common practice 1100, 1200, 1300 years ago was not to have 4 cups of wine, but to have 5. That was a very common practice. And for any number of reasons, that shifted. And for the most part, the Jewish people decided to have 4 cups of wine. But we still have a memory of the 5th cup of wine, which we call kosher Eliyahu. That's the cup we leave on the table but don't drink. So why this shifted, why in effect initially it was, for the most part, from the standpoint of what people did, 5 cups, and then it shifted to 4 cups. We condensed the 2 Hallels into 1 cup. It's a good question. But in any event, that kosher Eliyahu is presumably a remembrance of the fact that really there could be 5 cups and not just 4 cups. But my point is that the function of the cups of wine, one of the functions of the cups of wine, is precisely a Seder. It's to order the events of the night, the mitzvot of the night. And we say them in a certain order. We start eating, that's Kiddush. Kiddush starts the meal. And then we stop. And then we tell the story. And we start saying Hallel. We stop. We eat the meal. And then after the meal, we once again go back to speaking. We recite the Hallels. That's one way to order the events. The truth is that many Haggadot, I'm sure your Haggadot, almost all of them, if not all of them, in the beginning of the Haggadah, you'll see a little table of contents. There were many different tables of contents written for the Haggadah, but the one that's most commonly known and printed is Kadesh Urchatz. Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachza, Motzi Matzah. So there's actually, it's printed in the beginning of the Haggadah, and it tells you what we're going to be doing at night. A table of contents, in effect. In my Haggadah that I wrote several years ago with Rachel first, Say Lama, Go Forth and Learn, I talk about this table of contents. I pointed out that the table of contents has 15 sections to it. If we count Motzi Matzah as 2, Motzi Matzah, because it is 2 different things. One is we make a Motzi. Make a Motzi because we're eating a meal. And every festive meal we have Motzi. And we have, generally on Shabbat, we have 2 breads. So that's Motzi. So there's a festive meal. Matzah is what's special about the night of Pesach, that we make a blessing on eating matzah, because the eating of matzah is a mitzvah. So motzi and matzah are 2 different things. Motzi refers to the motzi that we make for the meal, And matzah refers to the blessing on the matzah. The common practice among the Ashkenazim, the Rambam didn't have this, but the Ashkenazic practice is to have 3 matzot at the Seder. And the common explanation of why you have 3 matzot at the Seder is this, that the 2 of the matzot are the 2 breads that we have every meal. Shabbat, you have lechem mishnah. So on Pesach, we have lechem mishnah, which is 2 matzahs. Then there's a separate mitzvah to eat matzah. And the matzah, the Talmud says, should be broken, prusa. Because the poor person, because in Egypt we were poor people, we were afflicted people. A poor person doesn't always have a whole matzah. So the custom is to break that matzah. But if it's a broken matzah, the Tosafos think it can't be good for lechem mishnah. Because lechem mishnah is 2 whole matzah. That's how you get to 3. 2 whole matzot for lechem mishnah, and the 3rd matzah, for the mitzvah of matzah, which is broken. So we start with 3 matzot. So motzi and matzah are 2 different things. And what I pointed out is if you count motzi and matzah as 2, then the introduction to the Seder, you have 15 pieces of 15 things in the table of contents. 15. Now the number 15 is actually an interesting number for the Seder, because we encountered the number 15 later in the Seder in the recitation of a little poem towards the end of Magid, which is known as Dayenu. Dayenu is not actually central to the Seder, but it's probably maybe the most known thing about the Seder, because it's often sung Dayenu. And Dayenu was not one of the core texts of the Seder, but it's in the Haggadah. And it begins, if you remember Dayenu, it starts with the phrase, Kama malot tovot lamakom oleinu. How many malot tovot, how many good things has God done for us? Now ma'alot in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, ma'alot is steps. So how many good steps have God, and we in the Dayenu, we list off the different things that we are grateful for. For this alone, we'd be grateful. There are 15 of them. So there are 15 steps, 15 Dayenus. And we also happen to know that there were 15 steps inside the temple. In fact, we have within the book of Psalms, we have a collection of Psalms which all begin with the same expression, same words, Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. And the Gemara says, how many Shirei Ma'alot are there in the book of Psalms? Take a wild guess. Well, there are 15. And the Gemara says that Shir HaMa'alot, when they would ascend and walk up the steps of the temple, I think on Sukkot, and maybe other times as well, I don't remember, but they walk up the steps. On each step, they could recite one of the Shirei Ma'alot. So Dayenu, which actually ends with, it's unusual, Dayenu ends with, if you had not brought us to the, you brought us to the temple. It ends with Beit HaBachira. It starts with leaving Egypt, going through the desert, coming into the land, and the different gifts we got in the desert, Shabbat, the Man. It ends with the temple. So therefore, it seems to be a poem that's written very much related to the temple. There is a thought among some of the academics that it was a poem actually written for the temple. That's one point of view. And the other point of view is that it wasn't written for actual use in the temple. It's not that old, but it was written as if one is in the temple. It's so related to the temple. That's a dispute. Personally, I go with the second opinion. I don't doubt it's written for the temple itself, but who knows? But in any event, it's interesting that the introduction to the Haggadah that is commonly sung, recited, certainly we're aware of it, which is Kadesh Urchatz, has 15 steps. And I think the point here is that what the table of contents is saying is that at the core of the Haggadah is a kind of expression of of our gratitude. We are grateful for being free. We're grateful for being able to make choices. And that's what the night of Pesach is about. It's not about entering the land, because the Seder focuses on leaving Mitzrayim. But we are so grateful that we're not slaves. And free people can make all kinds of choices, good ones, bad ones, etc. But at least we have the opportunity to choose. So the introduction makes that point. Tonight's about gratitude. And it's interesting, by the way, I mentioned before that the custom at the Seder is to have 3 matzot, not 2, but 3. And one of the explanations, the explanation of the Tosafos, is that we have 3 matzot at the Seder, because 2 of them are for the festive meal, which Lechem Mishnah, and the 3rd is for the matzah, which is broken. So you have 2.5 or whatever, 2 plus the matzah. That's how you get 3. You start with 3. But there actually is an earlier explanation of it's found in the Gaonic works. They have a different explanation. And the explanation is the following explanation. When one brings, there are different sacrifices that the Torah enumerates. In fact, we're in the book of Vayikra now, it talks about the sacrifices. And one of the sacrifices is the Karban Toda, is the sacrifice of Toda, the sacrifice of the Thanksgiving offering. Now, the Thanksgiving offering in the Torah is an offering that comes together with 40 breads. 40 breads are brought together with the Toda. 30 of them are matzah, 10 of them are chametz. So there are 30 matzot. Whenever you bring an offering of Thanksgiving, Karban Toda, you bring it together with what's called lachmei Toda, the bread that accompanies the Toda. The Torah says that of those 40 breads, you give 1 bread to the Kohen. It's known in the tradition as Trumat Lachmei Toda, the bread that is given, that's given to the priest. It's 1/10. So the priest, in effect, gets 4 breads. If I give a Thanksgiving offering, I give the priest 4 breads. 3 of those breads are matzah, and 1 is chametz. So in the Gaonic works, they have this tradition of 3 matzot for Pesach, but not because of Lechem Mishnah. The explanation is these 3 matzot represent the 3 matzot that we give the Kohen when we bring a Karban Toda, when we bring a Paschal sacrifice, when we bring a Thanksgiving offering. So it strikes me that what this tradition is about, which is very old, before the Tosafos, is it's seeing again the night of Pesach as a night of Thanksgiving, and perhaps it's even suggesting that the Karban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, which is at the center of the Seder, even though we don't have it, is some kind of Thanksgiving offering. It's not just a communal offering to represent community, which it certainly is, but it's also an offering of Thanksgiving. We are so grateful for freedom, and that's represented by the matzah the 3 matzah that we set aside, as if we're giving it to the priest, that's God's representative. We're saying we give you an offering of gratitude on the night of Pesach, as represented by what is for us the core symbol of the Seder, which is matzah, since we don't have the Pesach. So that's a different explanation of how we end up with 3 matzot at the Seder. Okay, so that's how we start with Kiddush. Let's get back to the beginning. We start with Kiddush. Kiddush, which declares the day is sacred, also begins the meal, allows us to eat a meal. Once you make Kiddush, you can eat your meal. But actually, we don't eat the meal. We stop and we begin the Magid. Now, it is true that we wash our hands right away and we eat vegetables, what's called karpas, as a kind of appetizer. But that itself even highlights more the fact that we don't eat. You're sitting down, you have your appetizer, and then you're stopping. You expect to, let's get to the main course, and that doesn't happen at the Seder. We are stopping, and we're going to start the Magid. Now, where does the Magid begin? Where does the Magid begin? So it's not clear where the Maggid begins. One would say perhaps it begins actually with the Manishtana. The Manishtana are a set of questions that we asked, which really begins the Seder, begins the Maggid, the Haggadah. We start with questions. Now our tradition has been for who knows how long, that before we start with the Manishtana, we have a little few lines. If you see in the Haggadot, you'll see that before the Manishtana, we make the statement of Halach Ma'anya. Halach Ma'anya diachal avatana bi'ara Mitzrayim. So this is the bread of Anya, the bread of affliction, referring to the matzah that we ate when we were in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry should come and eat. We welcome people to come and join with us. And then we say, now we are outside the land. Next year in Jerusalem. Now we are slaves. Hashata Avdei. And next year, hopefully, we'll be free. And that's that little declaration which is in Aramaic. It's not in Hebrew. It's very strange that we begin the Seder with the language not of Hebrew. We begin the Seder with Aramaic. It's also very interesting, just thinking about it, we also end the Seder with Aramaic. Not that that's actually part of the Seder, but how do we end the Seder? We end the Seder with song, Chad Gadya. The Zabin Abba B'Trei Zuzah. It's Aramaic, it's not Hebrew. So it's interesting that we start with Seder with Aramaic and we end with Aramaic. And perhaps the idea is that to focus on the fact that we are not fully redeemed. We're not fully redeemed. We're not fully free. I think this year more than in many years, we feel that we're really not fully free. We're not free to move around. We can't move around. We shouldn't move around. And we have a real sense that, we live in a very imperfect world. And that's a real sense, I think, this year at the Seder. Many people are alone for the Seder, which is, some people have never had that before. They always had someone Seder. And this year is very different. So we start with Aramaic, we end with Aramaic. But perhaps one of the ideas of Holach Ma'anya is the following. The truth of the matter is that what the Seder is about, theoretically about. I talked about the 4 cups and the 4 mitzvot of the night, but fundamentally, the Seder is about 2 things, primarily. One is that in the Torah, what the Torah emphasizes is that the night of the Exodus, we partake of a special sacrifice. It's a korban. The sacrifice was brought in the daytime on the 14th, which is called Pesach in the Torah, and it's eaten at night. It's eaten at night. And the Torah spends a lot of time describing the sacrifice that was brought in Mitzrayim, was eaten in Egypt, and talks about in the future, you also partake of this ritual. That's the main thing the Torah focuses on. The rabbinic understanding is that on the night of the Seder, there's another mitzvah. And the other mitzvah is to tell the story of the Exodus. L'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim. We'll get to that in a moment. There's 2 mitzvot. There's the mitzvah of eating the festive meal, which at its core is the sacrifice. It's a sacrificial meal. And the sacrifice is accompanied by matzah and by maror. And on top of that, there is the telling of the story, or the study of the story. The interweaving of these 2 we call the Seder. But at its core, of course, the key to the Seder is the Korban Pesach. Now, we don't have a Korban Pesach. No picture.
You're right.
Oh, okay. So we don't have a Korban Pesach. So instead of the Korban Pesach, we have the matzah. In fact, the afikomen, we wait until the very end of the meal to eat the afikomen. And presumably that has something to do with the fact that the Korban Pesach was seen by the rabbinic tradition, even though in the Chumash it's the meal. But in the rabbinic tradition, the Korban Pesach is eaten at the end of the meal. It's not the main course, it's the dessert. The Korban Pesach in rabbinic tradition is the dessert. The main meal was not the Korban Pesach. The main meal was a different sacrifice that was brought also on the 14th and eaten at night, which is known in the rabbinic tradition as Chagigat Yudalid, the festive offering of the 14th. The Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, was brought on the 14th, eaten at night, and the Chagigas Yudalid was also brought on the 14th and eaten at night, and that's the main course. The Korban Pesach is eaten ala sova. The Pesach was eaten at the very end of the meal. So the afikomen that we eat at the end of the meal, that represents the Korban Pesach. One of the reasons that they want people to eat the Korban Pesach at the end of the meal was because they didn't want people to eat the Korban Pesach when they were hungry. Because the Torah says about the Korban Pesach, be careful how you eat it. It's a sacrifice. Make sure to break no bones. Etzem lo tishbru bo. So they were worried if people were ravenously hungry, starting to Seder late, or who knows what, they might hurry to eat, and in their hunger would maybe break a bone. So that's one of the reasons they say, no, the Korban Pesach is the dessert. The meal is the other. On the Seder plate, we have two different things that represent. One represents the Chagiga, and one represents the Korban Pesach. They're two different things on the Seder plate, two different representations. So nowadays, we don't have a Korban Pesach. The matzah stands in for us, the main symbol of the Seder is the matzah. So perhaps that's the reason before we start the Magid, we're making a statement of Holach Ma'anya, we point to the matzah. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. But we also believe that we remember the affliction. We also are cognizant and we believe in the redemption. We're hoping that next year things will be better. Next year we'll be fully free. Next year we'll be in the Holy Land, etc. So that the matzah then represents for us, we're saying before we start, let me tell you something. The matzah is the key symbol tonight. It's not the Pesach, it's the matzah. And you think about the matzah being the key symbol, the matzah represents actually different things. On one hand, we think of the matzah and we think of the Korban Pesach. The matzah accompanies the Korban Pesach. So the matzah for us represents the leaving the land of Egypt. Because the sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, is the sacrifice that allows you to leave the land of Egypt. You bring the sacrifice and then you leave. So the matzah represents the transition from slavery to freedom. But the matzah also represents, as we say before we start the Seder, lechem oni. It represents the bread of affliction. I wanted to point out that, and in my Haggadah, it's one of my essays. In one of the essays in the Haggadah, this was written 6 years ago already, who remembers, but what I talk about in the Haggadah, one of the essays, is the first time we encounter matzah in the Torah. The first time we ever see matzah in the Torah is in the book of Breshit. It's not in Shemot. It's the story of the angels who were sent to check out Sodom, because God has heard bad reports about Sodom, and God wants to see personally what's going on. So God sends two angels to Sodom to check it out. And they come and they sleep in the street, it says. They're in the street. They're there to check it out. And Lot, who's Abraham's nephew, lives in Sodom, invites them to eat with them, to eat with him. At first they refuse. He insists. Chapter 19. And it says when they came to his house, Umatzot afa vayochelu. He gave them matzah and they ate. So on that pasuk, Umatzot afa vayochelu, Rashi has a comment. 2 words. Pesach haya. It was Pesach. So what does that mean? It was Pesach. There was no Pesach yet. But so I in the essay, I have a long essay about that. But the main point that's relevant here is the following. That if you look at the story of Lot and Sodom, and you look at the story of the Exodus, there's an eerie parallel between the two stories in so many ways. There are parallels between Sodom and Mitzrayim. Sodom is a kind of Mitzrayim. In fact, the Torah, when we first see Sodom, Lot looks up and sees Sodom before he moves there. In chapter 13, it says, he saw it was very fertile, Kigan Hashem ki eretz Mitzrayim, like the land of Egypt. So Sodom is compared to Mitzrayim. We'll discuss that. So many parallels in language and motif, Sodom and Mitzrayim. And then there's Lot. So Lot is giving them matzah. And in the story of Lot, you remember that Lot, they're about to destroy Sodom. They do destroy Sodom. And before they destroy Sodom, they tell Lot to leave. Take with you the people that are with you. His two daughters are with him. Two daughters that he offered to the people of Sodom are with him. Take what you have and leave. Get out as fast as you can. The Torah says, Vayit ma'amah. He tarried. So the angels, God's messengers, grab Sodom. They grab him. They grab him, his two daughters, his wife is there, and they drag them out of Sodom. And they tell him to go to the mountain. Do not stay here. Everything will be destroyed. Hahara himalait. Run to the mountain. And Lot says, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm afraid to go to the mountain. I'm afraid death will overtake me. Let me go nearby to a small city, where he goes to a small city nearby, and then he goes to a cave. He never goes to the place he's directed to go. Now, what's interesting is, if we think about the Exodus story, the beginning of the book of Exodus, it's pretty much the same story. That is to say, the Torah says that we left Egypt. The Torah says, Ki garshu mi Mitzrayim. We left Egypt. We didn't have all of our food prepared and all that. For we had left Egypt. We were thrown out of Egypt. The Egyptians threw us out. Garshu mi Mitzrayim. And the continuation of the verse is, V'lo yachlu hitma'meya. We could not tarry. Now, hitma'meya only appears 3 times in the Bible, in the Torah. Once in Sodom and once in Egypt. We could not tarry. Had we been able to tarry, and hitma'meya has a negative, it's an indecision. Had we been able to be mitma'meya, we would have been mitma'meya. We weren't that anxious to leave. Hitma'meya means, I'm not sure we should be leaving. It's the story of Lot. On one hand, Lot is dragged out. That by Yitma'amah, he tarried. And the reason Lot tarries, presumably, is because there's a piece of Lot that belongs in the town of Sodom. It's the piece of Lot that offers his 2 daughters to the Sodomites belongs in Sodom. On the other hand, Lot is Abraham's nephew. And he's similar to Abraham. He engages in hospitality. He's like Abraham in that sense. So Lot is, on one hand, Abraham-like. On the other hand, he's Sodom-like. And he has difficulty leaving. He has to be forced out, dragged out. By Yachaziku, they dragged him out. And Israel and Egypt is quite similar. On one hand, we have to be thrown out. Because had we been able to tarry, we would have tarried. When you read the story of the Torah, the continuation of the story, Israel in the desert, we remember that often in the desert, we say, why did you take us out of Egypt? And in fact, on more than one occasion, we say, maybe we should go back to Egypt. Story of the spies. Nidna Rosh, let's go back to Mitzrayim. It was very good back there. We had watermelons and cucumbers and who knows what else. And the second point, of course, is that Lot was told to go to the mountain. He doesn't go. He's afraid to go. He can't go to the place he's directed to go. That's the story of Israel and Egypt. We were told explicitly that God is taking us out of the land to bring us into the promised land, the holy land, milk and honey and all that. At the end of the day, virtually every person who leaves Mitzrayim never makes it to the land. We refuse to go. We're afraid to go, actually. It's very similar to Lot. So the point of the Lot parallel to Israel and Egypt is very striking. It adds another perspective on the story. Who are the people that leave Mitzrayim? The people that have deep connections to Mitzrayim and will find it difficult to leave, and the people that will not be able to take the next step, which is to enter the land. We are Lot-like in this respect, and I would say on top of that, in addition to that, there are actually many additions here, but one addition is that the Torah says that when God heard the cries of Israel in the 2nd chapter, it's one of the verses that the Haggadah will cite in their Medrash, Arami Oved Avi, and God remembered the God's covenant, Vayiskar Elohim et Brito, et Abraham et Yitzchak v'et Yaakov. God remembered Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God remembers the covenant, and God sees and God knows. In the story of Lot, it says, chapter 19, when God is describing Vayiskar Elohim et Abraham, Vayishalach et Lot mitocha hafecha. God remembered Abraham, and God sent Lot out amidst the destruction. So in each of the two cases, Lot, in the case of Lot, and Israel, in the case of Mitzrayim, are saved on account of a prior relationship, and specifically a relationship in Bereshit with Abraham, and in Sefer Shemot with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, with God's covenantal promises. God remembers the covenant, and God will redeem Israel. So the Lot parallel is very striking. Now coming back to my point about matzah, that's what I think Rashi had in mind, Pesach Haya. But I haven't even touched the surface. There's so many other interesting parallels. It's an essay. If you have the Haggadah, you should take a look. It's very interesting. But what does the matzah represent from this perspective? We know that bread represents covenant. Bread represents a relationship. When the angels come to Abraham in chapter 18, he gives them lechem. Gives them a whole meal and lechem, that which sustains you. We know when Yitro comes to visit Moshe after the Exodus, it says that Yitro sat down, lecho lechem. He sat down to eat lechem together with Aaron and the elders. Yitro's expressing his solidarity with Israel. He's very deeply connected. He gives us advice about judges and justice. So lechem represents a relationship, a full relationship. So what does matzah represent? So matzah represents a half-baked relationship, an incomplete relationship. And that's the point of the matzah from a certain perspective. The matzah represents transition, of course, but it represents, on one hand, perhaps freedom. It represents the Korban Pesach for us, the Afikomen, but it also is Holach Ma'anya. It recalls for us the experience of being in Mitzrayim. And the experience of being in Mitzrayim was not forgotten after we walked out of Mitzrayim. It took 2 generations for us to put Mitzrayim behind us. And even then, it's not clear that we put it fully behind us. But in any event, that's how we start the Seder. Halach Ma'anya, this, for us, we say at the beginning of the Seder, what is the central symbol of the Seder today, for us today, is not the Pesach. The central symbol is the matzah and all that the matzah represents. Let me stop here now, and if anybody wants to comment or question or whatever, please speak up. More than welcome. Seder's all about questions, you know. Let's start with the Manishtana. Well, if anybody, just unmute, if you want to, anytime you want to speak up, just unmute yourself and comment or question or whatever, agree, disagree, whatever, it's all good.
Rabbi, the halach manya, those four lines in reality sort of encompass everything we want to do on the Seder. It talks about matzah, it talks about feeding the poor, it talks about going back to Israel, and it talks about freedom. It sort of encapsulates the whole Seder.
Right, it encapsulates both the past and all of our hopes. I mean, the Seder is about, among other things, about our aspirations. It's a sense of the redemption is not here. We are still in a state of being unredeemed. That's the whole Lachma Anya. On the other hand, it's a statement of faith, one might say, faith in God, maybe faith in humanity, which sometimes is much more difficult than faith in God, I would say. Faith that we're going to get it right someday. That's the aspiration. That's the largest cup. That's the fifth cup, which we put on the table. We don't drink it, as if to say we believe it's going to happen. Let me just add to that and say that I think part of the hope in the future is the fact of the Exodus. In other words, if it happened one time, if there was once a redemption, if it happened once, then who is to say that it can't happen again? I think that's one of the big points about the Exodus and why it's such a central story for us, because it's about suffering on one hand and all the problems that come with being marginalized and all of that, but there was once a redemption. And therefore, there's the belief that it can happen a second time. And in fact, that's exactly the blessing that we make at the end of Magid. Asher golanu v'ga'alat avotenu. Right? We say, God, you redeemed us from Egypt. Kein Hashem Elokeinu. So likewise, bring us to a second redemption, where we will eat of the Paschal sacrifice. This Paschal sacrifice, the sacrifice in general, whether you want sacrifices or not, but in our liturgy, sacrifice represents a full relationship. That's the idea of the korban. Someday we'll be in God's presence, we'll be in the temple, God will dwell amongst us, and all that, all those hopes, utopian hopes. So it happened once. The same God who redeemed us once will redeem us again. It's the idea, I would say, that we have every day in our prayers, what the Gemara talks about, that before you pray in the morning, or any time, especially the morning and the evening we have it, we have a halacha of saying Geula before Tefillah. The blessing of Ga'al Yisrael and the blessings of the Shema, and we recall the Exodus and we recall the Song of the Sea in the daily prayers. And after you say Geula, then you pray. So it's called Smichat Geula L'Tefillah. And the idea of it, among other things, is that the idea that our prayers can be answered. The proof is they were once responded to. So it could actually happen again. And that's the point, I think, of the studying Holach Ma'anya. As you say, it encapsulates the whole history. It's both all about the past, but because there was redemption in the past from Anya, from the Inui, then there's a chance we'll have redemption in the future as well. Okay, so this is Holach Ma'anya. This is the introduction to Magid. Whether you consider it part of Magid or not is a good question. Actually, it's relevant. You know, it's relevant to what? It's relevant for each of the mitzvot is recited over a cup of wine. What's called in the halachic tradition a kos shel bracha. There are certain mitzvot, when you do the mitzvah, you do them over a cup of wine. Say at a wedding, birchat eretz and birchat nesuin at a wedding, sheva brachas. There were 6 blessings. The 7th is Bari Pri HaGefen. But the point is, the blessings are recited holding a cup of wine. That's called a cup of blessing, a kos shel bracha. Kiddush is that way. Kiddush is a statement about Shabbat, let's say, or Yontiv, but it's recited over a cup of wine. Havdalah is a statement recited over a cup of wine. At the Seder, all the mitzvot are recited over a cup of wine. The Birkat HaMazon is recited holding a cup of wine. During the rest of the year, it's optional. But at the night of the Seder, it's not optional. So that's Birkat. Those are the mitzvot are recited over the cup of wine. So the question is, when do we pour the cup of wine for Magid? Do we pour the cup of wine for Magid before Holach Ma'anya? Or do we pour the cup of wine for Magid after Holach Ma'anya before the Madishtana? The truth is, I don't remember. I've seen different things. That's the question. If you see Holach Ma'anya as part of Magid, you should pour the cup of wine before Holach Ma'anya. If you see Holach Ma'anya as an introduction to Magid, then you pour the cup of wine before Madishtana, after Holach Ma'anya. Check your Haggadah if you'll see what it says. It gives the direction. I don't know. There could be a machlokas between Maxwell House and Sovereign Coffee. I don't remember. But anyway, they give different instructions when to do it. In any event, let's come back to now let's get back to start with the Manishtana, which is Magid. I'm just making some general statements about the Seder. So the Manishtana are questions. According to one view, the Rashbam, the Manishtana were questions that the Mishnah gives us in case people don't have questions. In other words, the Mishnah provides you with questions. But the real point is not the questions of the Manishtana. The real point is to ask questions. Kana ben Shoel, and here we ask. So according to one view, you should ask a lot of questions. That's very important. Because unless we ask a lot of questions mean that we're bothered by something. So what are we bothered by? And then we can hopefully get to some answers. So we start with what we're bothered by. We start with the questions. And then we have, of course, the answer, which begins Avadim Hayinu. So the Gemara says that typically someone is asking me a question. So there's more than one person. But if one is by oneself, then the instructions are to ask yourself the question. It's interesting. If you're alone at the Seder. Some people this year may be alone at the Seder. And you're supposed to ask yourself the questions. So what does that mean to ask yourself the questions, actually? But it means, I think, to have an awareness that you have to ask the questions, because the way we get to the answers is through the questions. You have to think, what is really bothering me about? What questions do I have? What don't I understand? Which is the first step. To put ourselves in a frame of mind in which questioning is the goal. The ultimate goal is to get some answers, but we won't get there without the questions. And the truth is that if we reflect upon the Seder, the way it's set up, the Magid is set up, it's all about questions and answers. You start with Manishtana, which is presented as questions. Why is this night different from other nights? Manishtana. It's the classical way of understanding Manishtana. There may be another way as well, but that's a simple way to read it. And then when you proceed through the Haggadah as we have it, and one point early on in the Haggadah, you'll see Keneged Arba Abanim Dibra Torah. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, blessed is God, called Makom. Blessed is God who gave us the Torah. Keneged Arba Abanim Dibra Torah. The Torah speaks, as it were, of 4 children. Now, the Torah didn't really speak about 4 children, but the Torah has different questions or statements in the Torah, and the Midrash of the Haggadah attributes different statements to different kinds of children. And then the Midrash of the Haggadah says, Chacham Mahu Omer. What does the Chacham say? What does the wise child say? And they quote a verse from Dvarim, and the verse is, Ma Eidot V'Achukim. What are these rules and these laws that God commanded you? What is this all about? And then there's a response. And the second child in the Haggadah is called a Rasha, the wicked child, the insolent child. His question is, Ma Avoda Azot Lachem. What is this service for you? Which is taken by the Haggadah not to be a question, but kind of rhetorical question. So it's not a real question. It's framed as a question, but like, what's the point? What are you wasting your time for? The third child is a simple child, Mazot. What is this? So it's an innocent question. It's not a specific question about something. It's not like the Chacham wants to know every detail. Everything has some significance, but I don't know what the significance is. And then the fourth child doesn't know how to ask. Any of the Elishon. Okay, if someone doesn't know how to ask, then what can you do? Then we have to start. We have to begin the conversation. But we see that the Keneged Arba Abanim, that it's all about the questions. There are good questions, and there are bad questions. There are bad questions in the sense that it's not a question. We want people to ask real questions, not to be sarcastic or that kind of thing, cynical. So the Chacham is seen, the Rosh is seen as cynical, although his question is a very good question. We don't like the way it's framed, but it is a very good question. What is the relevance of all this to us? Now, that's the question. And that's really the question of the Chacham too. They have a different attitude. One wants to exempt himself from it, the other not. But the fact of the matter is that the question is still a very good question. But it's questions and answers. So it starts with Madishtana. Then you have the Arba Banim. Then you proceed through Magid. And at one point in Magid, you have another citation from the Mishnah. The instructions for the Seder are found in the Mishnah, in the last chapter of Psachim. And we have a statement in Rabbi Gamliel's statement. Rabbi Gamliel said, if you see in your Haggadah, Kosh lo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach, lo yatsa yedecho bato, v'yeluhem, Pesach, Matzah, Umara. Rabbi Gamliel said, whoever didn't say these three things does not fulfill one's obligation. You have to mention these three things at the Seder, otherwise you didn't fulfill your obligation. Presumably the obligation means the obligation to tell the story. You've got to mention these three mitzvot. One is the eating of the Pesach, the Korban Pesach. One is the matzah, and one of the bitter herbs, the maror. You got to mention those three. If you don't mention them, you didn't fulfill the obligation of telling the story. And then the Haggadah continues. Pesach zo she'anu ochlim al shumma. Why do we eat the Pesach? What is the significance of the Pesach? And the same question about the matzah. Matzah zo she'anu ochlim al shumma. Why do we eat the matzah? What does it signify? And the same thing with the bitter herbs. So Tabori, who wrote a commentary on the Haggadah, I cite him in my work on several occasions. He points out, very good point, that when you read the Mishnah, which is exactly the source, cites the citation from the Mishnah. When you read the Mishnah, it's not framed as a question. In the Mishnah, it says, Pesach zo, the Paschal sacrifice we eat, and it is on account of X. Matzah we eat on account of Y. Maror we eat on account of Z. It gives reasons. It doesn't frame it as a question. The Haggadah framed it as a question. Why do we eat the Pesach? And question and answer, which goes together with the entire Haggadah. The whole Haggadah, the whole Magid, is question and answer. So we start with the Manishtana, then we have the four children, then we have Pesach, Matzah, Maror, framed as question and answer. And what I added is that actually there's a fourth place in Magid where we have questions and answers. And the fourth place is the very end of Magid. Now, how do we end the Magid section? We end the Magid section. It's very striking. You know, we take these things for granted. The Seder is very simple on one hand. It's very puzzling on another. At the Magid section, you see in your Haggadah, we start, we make a statement towards the end of Magid that God did not know, in every generation, we see ourselves as personally leaving Mitzrayim. B'chol dar v'adar, chayav adam l'rot et atzmo, ki hu yatsa miMitzrayim. As if that person personally left the land of Egypt. Lo et avotenu b'lvad. God did not only redeem our ancestors, af otanu ga'ali mahen, but we were saved together with them. And there's a verse that's cited, once again from the book, from Sefer Dvarim, v'yotanu hotzi misham. And God took us out of there. V'yotanu hotzi misham is actually a continuation of the beginning of the Seder, Avadim Hayinu. Avadim Hayinu, which is the response to Manishtana, is a verse from Dvarim. It's part of the same section, the verse of the Chacham, Mo'edot ha'chukim v'hamishpatim. And it continues, v'yotanu hotzi misham, God took us out. And we say that to the end of Magid, we should see ourselves as leaving Egypt. Not only our ancestors, we were redeemed with them. V'yotanu hotzi misham, l'fichach. Then there's a custom to pick up the cup of wine. Therefore, because we were redeemed, therefore, what happens next? We have a responsibility to praise God.
Right.
We're going to sing a V'namo lefanav shira chadasha, and we're going to sing a new song. And what do we say next after we pick up the cup? What are we saying next? we're saying Hallel. We start the recitation of the Hallel. Psalm 113. You'll see in your Haggadot. Psalm 113, followed by Psalm 114. And then we make the blessing on Magid, Asher Ga'alanu Ga'al Yisrael, and we drink the second cup of wine. Psalm 114 is the end of Magid. What is Psalm 114? Psalm 114, which is the second Psalm of Hallel. Hallel is 6 Psalms, what we call Hallel. 113, 114 through Psalm 118. At the Seder, we say Hallel. At the Seder, with no blessing, we say Hallel. And before the meal, we say 2 Psalms. And after the meal, we say 4 Psalms. Lolanu Hashem, Lolanu. But we say 2 Psalms before the meal, which is found in the Mishnah. View of Beit Hillel. Psalm 114 is B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim. We end Magid with a psalm of gratitude. That's what we say. We're going to praise God for redeeming us, which is part of Magid. We start the Hallel in Magid. We finish it after the meal. And we say Psalm 114, B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim. When Israel left the land of Egypt. Very beautiful psalm. Beit Yaakov and house of Jacob left a foreign-speaking place. I tell you, Yisrael, we became God's holy ones. When we left Egypt, that moment of leaving Egypt, we became God's holy people. We became God's kingdom, Yisrael Mamshel Otav. Then the psalm continues. Hayam Ra'av Hayanos, Hayadem Yisov Yachar. It says the river saw and fled. When we left Egypt, the river flees. The Jordan turns back. The hills skipped like rams. The mountains like sheep. Then it continues. How does the psalm continue? The next verse of the psalm is, I call it 4 questions. 4 questions. River, why do you flee? Right? Jordan, why do you turn back? Mountains, right? Why do you skip like rams and the hills like sheep? And then there's a response, an answer to my 4 questions. The psalmist answers it. I flee because the God Chuli Aretz, I'll get to that in a minute, before the God of Jacob, who turns the rock into water. Charamish, the rock, to a spring of water. So we end the Magid with this psalm, unusual psalm, which is question and answer. It talks about the Exodus, and it has 4 questions and a response. So the question and response, we have now a 4th place in Magid. We began with Manishtana with questions. Actually, we have 4 questions. Initially, there weren't 4, but we have 4 questions. It's a whole other conversation. How many questions are there? It's a good question. But we also end with 4 questions. We ask the mountains, we ask the rivers, why do you flee and why do you skip? So it's a very appropriate psalm to end. B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim. And the answer is, Milifnei Adon Chuli Aretz, Milifnei Alo Yaakov. Before the God of Chuli Aretz, the God who turned the water into water. So it's interesting. The psalm itself is a very interesting psalm because what the psalm talks about is the Exodus. We are leaving Egypt. We're in motion. We're walking out of Egypt. The psalmist, the imagination of the psalmist understands when we left Mitzrayim, the world moves with us. Everything's in motion. Everything's in movement. In other words, leaving Egypt, the world has changed. The world has changed. It's a different world. Not only do we walk out of Egypt from slavery to freedom, but something is happening. There's a cosmic motion. Everything's moving. The rivers are moving. The mountains are moving. The world is moving. It's not the same world. I personally have that feeling right now, and whatever's going to happen with this business that afflicts the world, it's not about the Jewish people specifically, it's about the world. We're part of the world. So recognition of our own humanity is part of what this should be about. But the world is changing. I'm not sure the world's going to be the same afterwards. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I wonder about the world after, if we get through this, what the world will look like. I doubt it's going to go back to the way it was. And that's the sense you get at the night of Pesach, the Seder. Everything is changing. Everything's in motion. Everything's moving. And the psalmist asked the mountains and the rivers, what's this all about? Why do you run away and why do you skip? Notice that actually there are two different descriptions of the mountains and the rivers. The rivers are running away. Hayam ki tanus. Lanus is to flee. Oh, rivers, why do you flee? But as far as the mountains, why do you skip? Rakadu. To skip also means to dance. When the ark was brought back to Jerusalem, in one of the versions, King David brings the ark to Jerusalem, the people are dancing. Rokdim. Lirkod is to dance. On one hand, they are running away in terrible fright. On the other hand, they're dancing. And the response in the last verse of Magid is Lifnei Adon Chuli Aretz. I flee before the God of Chuli Aretz. Lecholel means to create. We run away before the Creator. But Chuli Aretz actually has another significance to it. I may have mentioned this, I don't remember. But Chuli Aretz, Chuli, recalls the song of the sea, Shirat Hayam. The Hallel in general, and this is a different conversation, recalls for us the Shirat Hayam, the language of the Hallel, especially Psalm 118, Psalm 114 as well, but Psalm 118 in particular, Min HaMetzah. It recalls for us Shirat Hayam. Shirat Hayam, the destruction of the Egyptian army, and not just the Egyptian army. When the Egyptian army is being destroyed, when it's swallowed into the waters, the psalm sees the world as changed. The 7 different words in the Song of the Sea refers to the nations of the world. One of them is Chil Achaz Yoshvei Pelashet. The dwellers of Pelashet, presumably the Philistines, Chil, are seized by fear. There's Chil, 7 different terms for fear in the song. Shamu Amim Yir Gazun, Chil Achaz Yoshvei Pelashet Yir Gazun, Chil, Nivhalu Alufei Edom, Elei Malav Yochazei Murad, Nomogul Kol Yoshvei Canaan is 5. Tipu Aleim Emata Vafachan, 7 terms of fear, one of which is Chil. Why do you flee? Milufnei Adon Chuli Aretz captures the sense of Chil. But it also captures something else about the Song of the Sea, which is at the end of the song, we are told that Miriam and the women went out to dance, to lead everybody, the men and the women, to lead them all in song. And the women went out to lead everybody in the community in song. They went out with tupim, with instruments, drums, umecholot. Mecholot are musical instruments, and they can combine with singing. Mecholot can be also dancing, singing, dancing, an expression of great joy. So the answer is, one might say, why do you both run away on one hand and dance on the other? Seems like a contradiction. It's no contradiction. The Creator, the response to the Creator is both on one hand awe, maybe even terror. On the other hand, there's a great joy of being in God's presence. So the mountains are dancing. The rivers are running away. So this is the way we end the Magid. We end the Magid with the beginnings of Hallel and with the psalm that talks about the Exodus, and a psalm that is framed in terms of questions and answers, and picks up on this Exodus, sees the Exodus as a cosmic event. It's not just about leaving Mitzrayim. It's about a change in the world. You know, it's interesting, when Moshe actually, the beginning of his career, he goes out one day to see his brethren, and he sees the Egyptian beating up the Jew. says. He looks around, there's nobody there. Either he thinks no one is there, or there's no one who's going to help who's there. Either way. And he smites the Egyptian. He buries him in the sand. And when Moshe kills that Egyptian, actually, it's not about killing one particular person. What Pharaoh hears about, he wants to kill Moshe. And what disturbs Pharaoh, presumably, is not that A killed B. But what Pharaoh understands very well is that killing that Egyptian was not about this particular Egyptian. He's making a statement about slavery, saying we're not going to accept this. We don't accept the status quo. And he understands that everything's going to change. If people get that idea, if that idea is accepted by people, then the world's going to be a different place and Pharaoh will be in a different place. That's what he understands. So that's not about a particular event. It's an event that has great significance way beyond the particular, has a cosmic significance. The psalmist sees this in Yetziat Mitzrayim. Sees Yetziat Mitzrayim as affecting everything, affecting nature, affecting creation. Creation. I dance before the Creator, and Yetziat Mitzrayim has changed the way we see the world. So that's how we end the Maggid section. So that's the Maggid part. And after we finish Maggid, we make the blessing, Asher Golanu. And then we start the meal, which is the sacrificial meal, one might call it. Sacrificial meal minus the sacrifice, because we don't have it. But it's the festive meal, which we are recalling the Korban Pesach. And that's the Afikomen. Let me stop here for a moment. Does anybody have any comments or questions or anything about the Seder in general you want to ask? You have about 15 minutes or so. See if I can respond to your comments or questions. So just
I have a question.
Yes.
And it just, it's funny that this just occurred to me today as you were talking, when I've been doing the Seder for decades. But looking at the four questions, right? The first about chametz versus matzah, the second about moror, the third about dipping, the fourth about reclining. And they say, why is this night? So 3 of the 4 are specific to this night, to the Seder. But 1 of the 4 is for the entire holiday, for all 7 days. It's not true that on every other night we can have chametz or matzah. It's
Right.
All 7 nights.
Okay, let me respond to that, and then I welcome anybody else who wants to speak. Let me say something about these so-called 4 questions. I mentioned earlier, I can't get into the depths of it, obviously. There originally were clearly 3 questions. There's a ton of stuff written about this. There were 3 questions. And the 3 questions that appeared in the beginning of the Seder are related to what we say towards the end of the Seder, Rabbi Gamliel's statement, whoever doesn't talk about the matzah and the maror and the Pesach has not fulfilled the mitzvah to tell the story. And then it explains why Pesach, why matzah, and why maror. So the thinking is that originally the Manishtana had 3 questions. One is about Pesach, one is about matzah, and one is about maror. Now, how that changed, actually, is very interesting. In my Haggadah, I talk about it to some extent. There's tons of stuff written about it. But de facto, we have these 4 questions today. Now, as far as the matzah is concerned, your point is that it's not really just about the night of Pesach. It's about the whole holiday. Sure, we don't eat chametz all the days of Pesach, but the truth of the matter is that the mitzvah to eat matzah is only the night of Pesach. In other words, it's not clear, and I'd say the majority view is that there's no mitzvah to eat matzah the rest of Pesach. You don't like matzah, don't eat matzah. Okay, when it comes to Shabbos or something, or the end of Yom Tov, we need Lechem Mishnah. Fine. But apart from that, there's no mitzvah per se to eat matzah, except for Pesach night. At the Seder, there's actually a mitzvah, and we make a blessing.
But that's not the way the question is phrased. It says on all other nights we may eat chametz or matzah.
Right.
And
all the nights, all nights means during the year. And every night of the year you have a choice. It doesn't refer to the 7. But every day of the year you like matzah, eat matzah. You like bread, eat bread.
Right, but that's not true of every other day of the year except for tonight.
So it is true of every day of the year outside of Pesach.
Right, exactly. That was my question.
Right, I agree. So it's that in that sense it's imprecise. But the point of the question, I think, is more about the mitzvah of eating matzah. How come tonight we have to eat matzah tonight? Why? What's so special? We have to eat the matzah. And that was my point about the questions. The questions are really about the mitzvot. Why tonight must we eat matzah? Why tonight must we eat Pesach? Why tonight must we eat maror? Those were the original 3 questions. Then they became 4 questions, 5 questions, and back to 4 questions. So that's, we have no Pesach. There's no question about Pesach in the Manishtana. Originally, there was a question about the Pesach when they had a Pesach. Well, we don't have a Pesach, so we took that out. And then the other questions, we can't get into the details of the questions. But my point is that the questions in their primitive form, I don't mean that negatively, but in their original form, were actually the questions that Rabbi Gamliel was answering. And I'll tell you something that Tabori points out, and since I mentioned him before, there's another good thing. He noticed there are different manuscripts about Rabbi Gamliel, Pesach, Matzah, Umaror. In some of the manuscripts, Pesach, Matzah precedes Maror, and some of the manuscripts, Maror precedes Pesach. And what he pointed out was that the manuscripts in which Matzah precedes Maror correspond to the manuscripts of Manishtana. They're in the same order. The order of the Manishtana in the manuscripts and the order of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror in the manuscripts are the same, which adds, I think, some credibility to the idea that Rabbi Gamliel's statement is actually a response to the Manishtana. Because it's funny, when you read the Manishtana, where's the answer, right? Because the next doesn't, the Avadim Oyino doesn't seem to be an answer to the Manishtana. So there may be an answer in some roundabout way to Manishtana. But his point, and others say this as well, and I'm totally convinced by this, that the actual answer to the Manishtana is Rabbi Gamliel's statement. Because the question was initially, what's the significance of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror? And Rabbi Gamliel answers that question. Pesach zo she'onochlim al shema. He frames as a question. Let me tell you why. For the following reason. Matzah for the following reason. Maror for the following reason. So that the response to the Manishtana, in the sense of the direct response to the Manishtana, he understands and others understand as found in the words of Rabbi Gamliel. Does anybody else have something else to say? Please speak up. Unmute yourself.
Rabbi, when you say it's only the first night you're obligated to eat the matzah, but in the Chumash, it sounds like in Shemot, in chapter 12, it sounds like from the 14th day, you eat unleavened bread until the 21st day. So
Right.
It sounds like, no, you're supposed to be eating matzah the whole
The question is,
time.
are you supposed to, or is the point is you can eat unleavened bread, but you can't eat leavened bread? The way it's taken by almost everybody is that the question is, I would say among the halachas, among the scholars, whether, in other words, I think there's no one who says, I think that you're obligated to eat matzah the rest of Pesach. That I've never seen that you're obligated. The question is, I believe that the Gra, the Gaon, thinks that that it's a mitzvah. That if you do it, it's a mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you're obligated to do it, but if you do it, there's a mitzvah. Others think it's not a mitzvah. You just can't eat chametz. What are you going to eat? You have no choice but to eat matzah. So that's a dispute. And whether the eating of it is a mitzvah or not is one question. But in terms of an obligation, I've never seen an actual obligation to eat matzah outside of the first night. We make a bracha the first night. Outside of that, I don't. You're right. So you could have read the verse otherwise.
Yeah.
But I think traditionally it's not read that way. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anybody else?
I wanted to ask a question.
Yes.
I wanted to hear your comments on Arami Oved Ovi and the connection between the Seder and the statement made when people bring their Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash.
Okay, so that have you seen my Haggadah? I have 2 chapters on that question. 2 of the 6 or 7 essays are on that question. So I suggest 5 reasons why they chose that parsha. In other words, the question that Herb is asking, I think, is, among other things, it is the strangest choice for Arami Oved Avi is the core text of the Seder. And it is a very peculiar choice for the Seder. For one thing, it's not from the book of Exodus. It's from the book of Deuteronomy. It's from Sefer Devarim. The night is the night of the Exodus. You would expect the text to be from Shemot, not from Devarim. What makes it even stranger is that in Arami Oved Avi, so the Haggadah provides us with a kind of midrash. Haggadah asks questions about these verses and says something. And the way the Haggadah works in Arami Oved Avi is that it cites typically another verse. Half the verses that it cites are from the beginning of Sefer Shemot. Cites a verse from Exodus to confirm or to explain or to explicate the verse from Devarim, which seems like a very backwards way to do things. They're citing a verse from Devarim and they're confirming or saying something about it from the beginning of the book of Exodus. Why not just read the book of Exodus? Why go to Devarim and explicate it through Exodus? But on top of that, Herb's question is that the choice of Arami Oved Avi is bizarre because Arami Oved Avi is the pilgrim's prayer that is recited when the pilgrim brings the bikurim, the first fruits, to the temple. Now, given the fact that in the Torah, Yom HaBikurim is not Pesach, but is Shavuot, is rather a bizarre choice to pick a text that's appropriate for the holiday of Shavuot and to use that text as the core text for the Seder. That is very strange. The truth is that there are many different reasons that that text was chosen. I suggest 5 reasons. I'm wondering, I have to think about this, but the truth is I'm thinking about giving one more shiur before Pesach this year just because there are a lot of people who are on their own for the Seder. And I was thinking about giving another class about the Seder, and maybe there I would deal with exactly with this question for the whole shiur. This choice of Arami Oved Avi, which is such a strange choice. But since you asked the question now, I'll say one thing about it now. In my Haggadah, there's one chapter that explains 4 reasons, and there's a whole separate chapter about a different reason. And in this particular case, usually when you ask a question, someone gives you 3 answers, you got to wonder about it, you know? But in this case, there are 5 answers. I think they're all good. I think there's truth to every one of the 5, and there's a very good reason that our tradition has chosen this particular parsha of Mikra Bikurim, actually. Let me say one thing about, and it conclude with one thought about Arami Oved Avi, which is this. The Haggadah itself describes what the Haggadah is. The Haggadah says the Haggadah is the vehicle for the fulfillment of a mitzvah. The mitzvah the Haggadah says is a mitzvah, and I think it's the first time we ever have such an expression. Mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim. There is a mitzvah on the night of Pesach, l'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim. Let's call it to tell the story. It's probably more than just telling the story. It's being telling and being fully engaged in the story. L'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim. It doesn't say l'saper et yitziat Mitzrayim, l'saper yitziat Mitzrayim, l'saper b'h. Rabbi Soloveitchik thought l'saper b'h means more than just telling. It's a deep engagement, it's study. But anyway, the Haggadah calls itself, says the mitzvah of the night, or one of the mitzvot, the core mitzvah, is to tell the story. And the Haggadah is the vehicle through which we tell the story. But it's interesting, he calls it l'saper. L'saper means to tell. Now, l'saper, when you tell a story, typically, you tell it to somebody else. It's not the same as the mitzvah to remember the Exodus, which is also a mitzvah every day, maybe twice a day. You can remember something if nobody else is there. You can remember it alone. But to tell the story, that's different. To tell optimally requires someone else to tell it to. And it strikes me that the choice of Arami Oved Avi, the person that brings the first fruits to the temple, there we have an example of somebody who is telling a story. And by the way, I would say, let me say the following. The person who tells the story, I'll go slightly different direction. The person that tells the story tells the story when that person brings the first fruits to the temple. The first fruits are called bikurim. Now, bikurim is given to the priest, but it's not the same as giving the tithing to the Levi or the truma to the priest, because bikurim is actually brought to the temple. The bikurim are brought in a basket and placed in front of the altar. Eitzel HaMizbeach. So bikurim is not so much simply a priestly gift as it is a kind of sacrificial offering. And this sacrificial offering comes together with a story. The person who walks into the temple walks over to the priest, hands the basket to the priest, and begins to tell the story, which is his story. My father was a wandering Aramean, came down to Egypt, suffered there. They harmed us there. We cried out to God, and God responded to us. That's the story. But the story is told in conjunction with the sacrifice. Now, it strikes me, I'll give you one answer. There are 5 good answers over here, actually. But here's one of them. The rabbis, when you read the Torah, it's clear that the mitzvah of the night of Passover is the sacrificial meal. That's obvious. The Korban Pesach is eaten in the house. Torah spends an enormous amount of time talking about this particular sacrifice. The rabbinic understanding was that the night of Pesach, the Seder, is 2 things. It is the meal, for sure, but the meal in conjunction with telling a story. So the rabbis were searching, where do we find such a thing? That we bring a sacrifice, and the sacrifice has connected with it the telling of a story. There's only one such place in the Bible. The one who brings the first fruits to the temple. The bikurim are sacrifice. They're a korban. But they're a korban that comes together with the story. So we have a paradigm for the rabbinic understanding of our central ritual, which is the Seder, the core ritual of the Jewish people, which contains the meal of gratitude and the festivities. And you live in this world, it's a meal, actually, but it's also about study. It's about trying to figure it out, trying to understand what it's about, which is the Seder. So the rabbis searched for a model for their understanding of the Seder, which is an understanding of Judaism, actually. Because the Haggadah thinks to understand Judaism, if you understand Yetziat Mitzrayim and the Seder, you'll understand the Jewish religion. That's the claim the Haggadah makes. Mo'edot ha'chukim va'mishpatim in the Torah is a question about the whole Torah. For the Seder, it's a question about Korban Pesach and the Seder and the laws of Pesach. Because if you understand Pesach and the Exodus and all that well, you have deep insight into the whole religion. So they searched for a paradigm. Where do we have a telling of a story accompanying a sacrifice? There's only one such place, which is the bringing of the first fruits, Mikra Bikurim. So that's one reason why they chose Mikra Bikurim for the night of the Seder. We have the sacrifice together with the story. The one who brings the first fruits is telling a story. And telling the story, Sipu Yetziat Mitzrayim, is the mitzvah of the night. Okay, I'll stop here. That's one answer to your question, which is a very good answer. And I have 4 more good answers too. They're all true. In this particular case, usually when someone gives you 5 answers, forget about it. But in this case, there are 5 different ways to understand it. And there's something, I think, to all of them. So thank you for the question.